Hello and welcome back to another episode of TGE'S Current Read. I am your host, Samantha Herbst, and today I'll be interviewing New York Times best-selling author Abigail Dean, best known for her first novel, Girl A, which was a runaway success and an instant bestseller. Abigail's writing has appeared in The Guardian, The Observer, The Times, and The New York Times. The former lawyer is also the author of Day One, currently on my Audible playlist, with a third novel currently gracing my nightstand. I can't get rid of it yet, with its haunting presence. The Death of Us is officially out this month, and Abigail Dean joins me from across the pond to talk about it. Welcome, Abigail.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam. Hello.
Oh, I can't wait to get stuck into the ins and outs of your writing process and this book. But it had me in tears yesterday, let me just say. I say that it's currently gracing my nightstand. I don't know when I'm going to be able to take it down from my nightstand to make way for anything else, because I was kind of stuck in this, like, I read the final words yesterday and didn't know what to do with myself. It was one of those moments where I read certain words and I don't want to give anything away, but I read some words and I just knew where it was going and I burst into tears and I picked up my child from school, just tear streaked. I didn't know what to do. I put on sunglasses. I'm like, I hope nobody notices that I've been crying all morning. And it's going to be one of those things that I'm going to struggle to get stuck into the next book. Kudos, congratulations. This is really an incredible feat.
Thank you so much, Sam. I feel like you shouldn't be. I shouldn't take satisfaction in like making people cry. Like, it's generally not something I get up in the morning like really desperate to do. But I think as an author, like it does feel like sort of like this massive achievement when people react emotionally to your characters, whether it's like laughter or tears. So I'll take that as a massive compliment. But sorry too
No,
about
you
sunglasses.
don't need to apologize. I love getting into my feels, and I think we're going to be speaking about genre and how you define genre. But I really want to start at the beginning. I always have Julie Andrews in my head when I say that. Let's start at the very beginning, because writers' journeys fascinate me a lot, and yours is incredible and so inspiring. I said in your bio that you're a former lawyer. Are you a former lawyer, or are you still practicing? Because you were a lawyer throughout your 20s.
Yeah, I'm not practicing as a lawyer anymore. So I left the law back in 2023, just before I started writing The Death of Us, actually. So I managed kind of to write two books while I was still working as a lawyer. And then I had my little boy, and suddenly that like very precarious tower of cards like just was all over the floor. So yeah, I've been 2 years full-time writing now.
Congratulations on the birth of your little boy. You haven't let on, nothing's well. I'm sure if people follow your sort of social media closely, or like are really digging in, maybe they would know, but I had no idea. Congratulations. It's quite a life change, and I think that this book makes a lot of sense now to me in a weird way.
Maybe to some degree. I think it's that strange thing where almost every book every book I've written, certainly, and all my writing that is not published, of which I'm sure every writer has like many drawers. Um, I don't think there's this like obvious reflection of what's going on in your life at the time necessarily.
Mm.
Like, I don't think it's sort of, oh, like, look, you have a baby, so the character in the book has a baby. I don't think it's something that is that transparent, but I think you do, when you read back on your work, you see how particular life events have kind of wormed their way in some ways. That it often takes kind of a lot of hindsight, I think, to actually see quite how they're reflected in there. But I think often they are to some degree.
Absolutely. So I'm listening to, full disclosure to you and to the listeners, because I try and be as prepared as possible. I'm listening to Day One, your second novel. I have downloaded on Kindle, paid for, Girl A, which came out during the pandemic, and I remember it vividly, and it's just one of those books that bypassed me for whatever reason. So it's ready and waiting, and I actually can't wait now to get stuck in. So I'm reading all your novels in retrospect now.
Thank you.
And I think that compared to day one, which I can compare it to, the texture's different. So I hear exactly what you're saying about just happenings in your life that just impact your writing differently. And I wonder also about your writing process, because I know that your debut, Girl A, you took 3 months off, 3 months off to write that after a particularly harrowing work experience, and then you continued to write part-time after becoming a lawyer for Google, which is a cool story in and of itself. But you wrote sort of on the train, on the tube, after hours, and but you had the motivation to carry on. So I think that the juggle is probably now similar but different. There's still a lot of juggling between your identity as a mother now and your identity as a writer, in the same way that you were juggling law and writing.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. I have a very I have kind of like a really forced bookend to my day of like the nursery run. So it's kind of I know I have a certain like finite number of hours from Monday to Thursday to write in, and I think that helps with the preventing procrastination quite a lot.
100%.
It's very weird to kind of drop your son at nursery and you're kind of talking about, well, actually, often just talking about poo at present. Like that's his general favorite conversation topic. And then, you kind of return and sit at your desk and write something that is generally quite dark. And certainly in The Death of Us, it feels like quite like I guess, kind of like quite like a grown up kind of book. And then I've got that kind of maybe 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. And then I'm back to nursery to collect him and return to, the Mr. Pooh discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels like a real juggle. It certainly doesn't let me become as pretentious as I probably would be otherwise. Like I don't think I get to kind of, dwell into like the midnight hours, which I would do, certainly kind of like agonizing over my characters and punctuation, because I feel it's much more of a fixed period of time I get to spend with books and with characters, and I think it has made me probably more focused than I used to be.
I think motherhood changes you in that way, and it's cool to reflect back, because I was listening to an interview that you had with Emma Gannon, who wrote Olive. And that was back in 2021 on Girl A, and it was on your launch day, on your publication day actually, and it was all online, all on Zoom. I'm sure that your experience with this is going to be so different as it was with day one probably. And you guys were talking about how you had to stop yourself writing way into the night, because you get really into the story and you end up not being able to sleep, and also when you would listen to true crime podcasts, it would be a silly idea kind of to listen to it late at night, especially if you're alone and your husband was traveling. And that exact thought ran through my head of, you know what, if you had a child, you would have to write in that finite amount of time, exactly what you're saying. And so it's so funny now for me to have kind of leapt forward in time with you and seen how and I don't think it's necessarily pretentious. You might think that maybe you sounded pretentious at the time, or you would sound
Just a
pretentious.
little.
It's not, I don't think so. I think it's just you working with what you have as a writer, and maybe that extra push to get that stuff done in that time is exactly what we need, because otherwise we are going to be changing the slightest things instead of just getting it out into the world, right?
Yeah, and I'm also kind of quite self-aware that changing the slightest thing is a real weakness of mine. So I feel like I am quite obsessive over like the sentence level of writing and of a book. And I think it is quite healthy to have that pressure to kind of make forward momentum rather than simply agonizing over what you wrote the previous day. And that was certainly what I used to do whenever I was trying to write in my 20s in like very small pockets of time. I just didn't quite I guess I didn't quite commit to what needs to be done if you want to write in a novel form. Certainly that there is just a simple kind of number of words that you will have to sit and write
Mm.
and get done. And it's a kind of horrible but very true fact. So I think I have to kind of drag myself away from the agonizing and actually think like, no, let's proceed rather than getting bogged down in details that also, you can turn to at a later time. And, especially I think having seen now two editing processes, I kind of understand more how much can be done at that time as well. So I kind of try to postpone
Mm.
my own faffing.
Was
And
it?
faffing is probably being a bit ungenerous, but my own attention to detail.
I hear what you said. It's like they say, uh, draft at speed, write at leisure, or as Ernest Hemingway, I believe, put it, write drunk, edit sober.
Yeah,
And that is
yeah.
just like, just get it out. But I also struggle with that. However, I can attest with The Death of Us, there are some cracker sentences, writing that just hits your gut on a level that you've achieved that. And that's maybe a message to other writers who are trying to do this is do that. You can always come back to it, and that trust your writing, I suppose. Trust that it will be there. But I mean, I'm waxing lyrical about this book that our readers or our listeners who are readers might not know much about. So what is your elevator pitch for The Death of Us? What is this book about essentially? What can people look forward to?
Yeah, The Death of Us is a love story. It's a love story I always think of that has been interrupted essentially by a thriller. So it follows two characters, Edward and Isabel, and they meet when they're 19, and they're students. They fall in love. They move to London together, and their life is going pretty well. Like, they have a pretty great relationship in many ways, not perfect, but good. And then when they are 30, their home is invaded one evening by a serial predator who assaults Isabel. And The Death of Us is really about how that one night changes the whole course of their relationship. And we meet them at 55 when they are reunited for the sentencing of this man who has finally been caught 25 years after he attacked them. And it's a question of whether that one night is something that they can survive, that their relationship can survive. It's a manhunt, it's a thriller, but at its heart, it really is a love story, I think, between these two characters who survive something terrible.
I think you've 100% achieved that. In fact, it's one of the greatest love stories I've ever read because I'm not.
Thank you, Samantha. That's amazing
No,
to
it really,
hear.
it genuinely is. I think that's why I was crying. It had this like really normal people feel to it. Sally Rooney does it so well in just taking the mundane texture of a relationship, the mundanities of life, and that there's so much beauty in that. Whereas, you'll think of your Romeo and Juliets and your romanticy and that kind of fiction. You have these great big sweeping love stories, and I'm like, for me, I'm such a pragmatist, and maybe there is a bit of a romantic in me, but I'm not expecting, a man to stand outside my window with a boombox. In fact, if anybody did that, I would have been like, no, what are you doing? Just
Call the
no,
police.
please. When I met my husband, I said, please don't open the door for me. I was really just such a pragmatist and trying my best to be a good feminist that's not what does it for me. This type of textured love is what really does it for me. And so I really do, I mean it when I say it's one of the greatest love stories I've ever read, which is so funny because it's a thriller, a psychological fiction, right? And there's so much of that true crime element in it. So I think you've hit a crossing of ways in your genre, right? How do you feel about that? Is it more? I mean, you're not going to shelve it in the romance section. Where would you shelve it?
I think it would probably stick with my other books in the thriller section. But I hope that the first thing people do take from it is that love story. So I'm kind of delighted that you say that, because I think that is like the heart of the book. I mean, you follow these characters from 19 to 55, and then they're divorced at 55, so something has kind of gone terribly, terribly wrong, but they're kind of constantly in each other's lives for that period of time, for those kind of nearly 40 years. And I think, exactly as you said, in terms of seeing the real mundane in a relationship, I think that was actually really important in writing. I mean, I think that the epic love stories can be moving in their way, but I wanted there also to be this sense that these people have been together for like a long time, and it's
Mm.
still working. For a lot of the time, it is still working really well. But that obviously means that you do just see them watching TV together,
Mm.
or ridiculing each other, or talking about like work, and navigating very, very kind of everyday issues, which I think they actually do in quite a good way, versus this huge, massive, terrible issue and disaster that strikes them. So the mundane was really important, that kind of mundane love story that starts as teenagers as well, and that you see them as kind of older, much older adults, and how those mundane things change over time. Like I think it's really interesting to see a long-term relationship changing
Absolutely, and to
with time
imagine
too.
that. Mm. You've really deftly woven in the past and the present. So this is one thing that I really love about the novel is Isabel's you alternate between Isabel and Edward, and Isabel's pieces are in the second person to Nigel Wood, who we know from the get-go is the perpetrator. He's on trial, or awaiting sentencing, and Isabel's pieces to him. You're always curious throughout the novel, like, why is she addressing him, talking to him, and it kind of unpacks itself over the course of the novel. So that this is in the second person, and it covers the past, and it colors in the details for us from when Edward and Isabel met and until the present day, whereas Edward's sections are written in the third person but deal with the present. So I'm really curious about the writing process here. Did it naturally unfold that way? Is this how the characters spoke to you? Or was there a very intentional way in which you crafted the story? I'm going to do it this way and then this way.
I think those voices were there from the beginning, in terms of sort of how to structure their how they were going to address, how they're going to be addressed, and how they were going to handle that, which person they were going to be in. There was never any kind of doubt around that. Whereas in previous books, I have had more of a kind of agonizing process as to quite how to write it. So Isabel, in the very first chapter, um, when she finds out that the South London invader has finally been captured, she's asked by a policeman to essentially kind of prepare her victim impact statement. And she sees that a kind of absurd irony of having to sort of say in a few paragraphs what has that completely decimated her life in many ways, and her relationship. And so I think, to me, that was an important component, that it would actually be what she kind of wanted to say in full. And I also wanted her to have that voice addressing Nigel Wood as her having kind of entire power
Mm.
over over the narrative. I mean, I'm not particularly interested in the South London invader as a character at all, and I wanted that to be very, very key. That essentially this is her chance to speak to him, and he doesn't get a voice in the Death of Us at all. And kind of in contrast to that, Edward's character is much, much more reserved, and that's kind of one of the reasons their relationship falls apart, I guess. And so I think the third person makes it easier to have a character who's a bit more elusive, and who is a bit harder to see, at least at first, in the narrative. I mean, it's a very close third person.
Yeah.
So it's not kind of particularly detached. And increasingly as the novel goes on, I hope you get to know him kind of better and better and better. But I think it kind of lends itself to his general tendency to not want to talk about things, and to maintain kind of a very sort of like professional step back from what happened, and also when you first meet from when they first meet from Isabel, who he's been estranged from for a decade. So the narrative voices were there pretty early on, to be honest.
It makes so much sense, but you do it so well in just revealing those little character nuggets of, you say Edward, so you have Isabel's interiority that's in your head throughout the novel, and her thoughts and her innermost thoughts. But then Edward, there's certain things, and I'm like, I know in my life who is like this. It's so real how he doesn't want to order room service, for instance, because he doesn't want to deal with the awkwardness of the waiter coming in, or the wait staff coming in and dropping off the food. That makes him so intensely awkward, And I think this is a really good section to maybe read out the part that we had earmarked, because it deals with the third person attached, Edward in court viewing the first victim of the South London invader, and what kind of his reaction is in that moment, because we're not in his head, but I think it's so telling. So I don't know if you want to open up to that page. We, for the viewer's sake, we have tried our best to earmark a section, and I really struggled with this, and with Abigail's help we got there, to earmark a section that she could read that would give you a taste of what the novel is like, without revealing too much. But this is the kind of on how the court case begins, of the victims giving their testimony.
Sure. There had been times over the past few months when Edward had questioned the value of sitting there, listening to stories he had read about before, or memories so unpleasantly similar to his own he felt he might already have endured them. But he did not recognize the first victim at all. She was a fragile woman peering tiny from her trouser suit. Her hair was paper white and pinned with care. "Well, hello," she said when she reached the stand. "I suppose I just read the thing, do I?" From the corner of his eye, Edward saw a smile rise across Isabel's face. "That's right, Mrs. Covington, in your own time." She took a neat few pages from her pocket and unfolded them. As she did, the lines on her face seemed to deepen. Their distribution brought to mind the pattern Edward noticed when he happened to catch himself in the mirror: cynicism, concern, frown upon frown, and this pained him. He had hoped to find less of himself in this room. In 1991, Judith Covington was 35 years old. She worked as a teacher at the local primary school. Her son was nearly 2. Each evening, she tidied her classroom and collected him from a childminder across the street. They walked home together. Her son refused to sit in the pram. Their journey was a slow one. That night, it was early March. The clocks had not yet gone forward. By the time they reached the house, it was dark. She fed her son a snack. She bathed him. They sat together in his bedroom on the chair where she had once fed him. "Where's Spot?" between them. "Again," her son said. Each time Spot was found. "Again." At 7:30, she turned off the child's light and sat with him as he fell asleep. He was slow to sleep that night. She waited until his breath was steady and deep, and then she rose from the chair beside his bed and tiptoed from the room. When she opened the boy's door, there was a man standing in the light at the landing.
It's so chilling, the scenes of the abuse and the trauma. And this book was delivered to me when I had a discussion with someone in the publishing world about a particular publicist who just knows what I love, what I like to read. And I was talking to her about trauma and the difficulties of writing trauma. And you have been very open about sort of loving true crime, or being fascinated with true crime. I think like many people and many women as well, there's a whole thing, and people joke about it, but women who have this, I don't want to say victimhood, but the sense of kind of we need to survive in our heads all the time just by nature of being a woman. I think that bleeds into women's now stereotypical fascination with true crime. So I'm wondering how you traverse this, because I really do think you did it well. This is why it was put in my hands. Is you are not you're quite restrained with your trauma in writing it explicitly, but we know exactly what's happening, so I can carry on. It's so chilling, and it's hard to think about, and it did keep me up at night. I won't lie, but it didn't traumatize me, which you run the risk of kind of doing that. So how did you kind of navigate? It's a tricky terrain, for me at least.
I guess the first thing I think is that I mean it's very difficult with true crime because I completely understand the criticisms leveled against the genre, and also that there was such an explosion of it about a decade ago. Explosion of kind of podcasts and TV shows and Netflix documentaries. And my view is that I guess I don't think it's unusual to be fascinated by kind of the worst things that people do to each other. Because I mean they are kind of the most extreme, and I guess conversely people are also fascinated when people are particularly heroic or particularly good. I think there's always that question of what brings somebody to do something like that, and then how do you survive in the aftermath. So I guess it was having that, acknowledging that that is something that I do find kind of interesting, and sort of that I do kind of have questions that I want to explore, in relation to. I think then there's a second question of how do you go about doing that in a way that doesn't glorify these acts, that makes it really more about how people survive and how people live in the aftermath of something versus a kind of exploration of the grotesque and an exploration of violence, and anything that comes even close to a celebration of that. And in the Death of Us, I mean, I think that the South London invader, the kind of perpetrator, he's caught very, very early in the novel, literally the first chapter. And so there's never any kind of fascination about who did it, about his nature, why he did it, really. It's very much about the impact of what he did on these two people, and on the other victims who are there in court to give their statements as well. And I hope that means that the novel steers away from anything that feels like all you will get from it is the violence and the details, because I don't think they're needed, but more significant, I just don't think they're that interesting or that powerful. There are things that you need to know about kind of what Isabel has endured, but I think they're relatively minimal, and it's much more important that you see kind of her thoughts and feelings about them versus the simple kind of acts of violence and of sexual assault that themselves.
I think you deal with it so delicately in not glossing over the trauma. When I've read novels where people symbolize a rape, which wasn't as impactful for me. And then I struggle with that as a reader and as a writer, thinking, goodness, Sam, what do you want from the writer? Do you want them to really be gruesome about it? Because then it is glorifying it. And you can imagine kind of existing perpetrators picking that up. And that's where you get kind of trauma porn, or the idea of trauma porn from. So on the subject of trauma and reading this novel and kind of thinking about these same things, it reminded me of a conversation I had with a local author. Well, she's now local to you. She lives in London, I believe. She's initially from Namibia, studied in South Africa. Her name's Margie Orford. And she had thought a lot about exactly what you're saying regarding trauma, and it just brought me to this article, and I'd really love to share this link for you. But basically it says that she had started out writing another she was a crime author, and I'm going to try and gloss over this as quickly as possible because I didn't want to labor too much, but I did want to share this because I just think there's so much juicy parallel here. And she'd started out on another edition of her series, like the next installment of her true crime series, which followed this woman, Claire Hart. and it investigated pornography. And what she says is that I'd written this book that deals with pornography, but I felt that Claire Hart, even though she had the sensibilities as a police profiler, was reproducing the male gaze that I was trying to interrogate. So I scrapped the book. And that was, it wasn't until actually I'd read your novel that I understood what she was saying in this. So after a while, she wrote her novel, Eye of the Beholder, and it explores how art can sometimes, how art can be a conduit for some of life's biggest horrors and atrocities, similar to what The Death of Us deals with. And ultimately, once out of the crime genre, she was able to really interrogate the space. So as I say, that's like a really long story to get me to my point, which is that I think you've done it and you continue to do it throughout all your novels. To an extent with Girl A, in as much as I've read around it without spoiling it for myself, you've done this. You haven't written the typical whodunit. It's very similar to The Room. Lex, your main character, gets out at the very beginning, and it's dealing with how she deals with her trauma and her relationships with her siblings quite, throughout the novel. Day one, in as far as I've gotten with it as well, there is a school shooting. So these are very real things traumas that we deal with. And then, of course, home invasions, which cuts so close to the bone for South Africans in particular. We have a terrible crime rate, and I think that there really is a content warning here for anybody who has suffered trauma, in as much as you do, you are very delicate in your writing with it, and you there is a content warning here for readers if you are struggling with this at the moment. As it is, though, it is about survivors. Girl A, you wanted to bring across a kind of endpoint of hope. You wanted the reader to come away with hope, and I think you really succeeded with The Death of Us in leaving us with a love story, an epic love story, and sharing people's humanity with dignity, respect. So I think what kind of would you want to be exploring next, and what questions are left unanswered that you still want to explore in your writing?
I think that I suspect the next book I write might be quite different. And I at present I'm not writing Sam, because my second son
You
is
got
here.
no.
He's 9 months old.
Oh my
So at
goodness.
present,
Okay,
yeah,
bury the
yeah.
lead. Why don't you?
He's downstairs with his gran.
Congratulations. Wow. Okay.
So I've kind of not been writing for the last 9 months, and then you have that kind of like space to start thinking about ideas. But at present, I feel quite far away from a fourth book. In terms I've not kind of began anything. I'm not kind of totally committed to an idea, so it feels quite nice actually. But I think. I certainly think that the Death of Us, in terms of the love story, that being, I suppose, being like, at the risk of sounding very, very cheesy, the kind of ultimate triumph over over trauma and kind of violence is that love story, which is full of kind of humor and affection, as we've said, kind of the mundane. I don't know if I will write kind of again about trauma in quite the same way, because I think that with my last three novels, kind of the various avenues I've wanted to explore, I have done. And so I'll probably be turning to quite a different theme. I just need to work out what it is, which is, but that's open for everybody, isn't it?
No,
Everyone ends up there with a blank page. So
I think so. And it sounds like you're quite sanguine about it, that you have, I have every confidence in you that you'll be able to pick it up, and obviously no pressure whatsoever, because you've done such a phenomenal job, and you will be promoting this book, which is a job in and of itself. So I can really appreciate that. I honestly don't know how authors do it. I do like, as a journalist, I actually do know this, that sometimes you're busy working on edits or post-production on one story while doing interviews for another, and you've kind of, your head's in two places at once. So where does your obsession lie? You spoke a lot with Emma Gannon about obsession, so I guess it's
yes.
really just that obsession's gonna come. It's just wait and
Exactly.
trusting. It's not waiting. It's trusting that it will come, right?
I think that's the case, that there is some element of trust about it. And I think with each novel, I've sort of, when I've been working on it or talking about it, I've always sort of felt, oh, am I gonna, kind of like a breakup, right? Am I ever going to feel that way about a
Mm,
person, another person again? And it does happen. And I think that there is some kind of trust required for that. It's been really nice to get to talk about the death of us and continue to obsess about it because I'm not writing at present, because I am spending time with my little boy. So it's been nice to have that space rather than talking about it while writing another book.
absolutely.
So I
And
feel really fortunate for that. Actually, it's been kind of nice to spend that final time with the book. But yeah, I'm now quite looking forward to returning to writing when he toddles off to nursery. So
well, motherhood is a beast in and of itself, and heaven knows there's definitely space and room for novels around motherhood that aren't schmaltzy or stereotypical. How do
yes, I
you
mean,
feel
I
about
think
that?
I've read that you've spoken to Ashley Audrain in the
Yes,
past,
I have.
and she is a friend. Our novels came out, but our debut novels came out at exactly the same time. And I mean, I The Whispers is such a wonderful book about motherhood, I think. I mean, as is The Push, but I mean, I absolutely
The
adored The
Whispers.
Whispers, and there's just great writing out there about motherhood. So there's lots of inspiration,
L-
if nothing
Definitely
else.
lots of inspirations, definitely room for more. And I just wonder if that's because for me, I mean, for me, it became an obsession. How do we traverse this? How do we not make it schmaltzy? So I don't know. I don't wanna plant that seed. Let me not do it.
I'm open to ideas.
I, I just, oh, an Abigail Dean that deals with that really cuts to that, to the truth of that, because you didn't do sibling relationships, in a schmaltzy way. You didn't do love in a schmaltzy way, but you there's so much text and truth to what you do, right? And I think as long as you are sort of keep that integrity with yourself, then there's definitely something there. So I mean, I look forward to it. When it happens, I'm patient. I've still got two of your books to get through. So let me do that and I will not bother you. I do want to know though, what is on your nightstand, because every writer is a reader. And you told Emma Gannon that The Road was one of your kind of a Little Life as well. And I'm just like, oh, I'm going to reread that. And then you mentioned The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And I'm like, I'm going to reread that. So both of those books are going back on my nightstand for a little inspiration, because I just thought, yes, I think so. I think we have some good writing or reading interests in common. What are you reading at the moment?
So I'm one of the authors I've loved over the last year or so, and I've just read all of her books. Is Claire Keegan, who is the short story writer.
Yes.
So I've loved her. I mean, I've really enjoyed So Late in the Day recently, but Small Things Like These is one of my favorite books of all time, which I read last year and just absolutely adored. I think she does a really kind of she's so her writing is so emotional, or at least evokes such emotion, but it's also so quiet, in this incredibly elegant, understated way, where just not a word is amiss. And that's something I kind of hugely admire, and yeah, she's absolutely wonderful. And I've also loved Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the topic of motherhood. That is a novel which is structured as a letter to her, to her young son. And I think the best way I can put it is that it basically describes motherhood, motherhood of young children, of a baby and toddler, just like a thriller. Like it's so gripping. I mean, there is a scene when her son is lost in IKEA that is as tense as like any scene in any thriller that I've ever read. And it's wonderfully written. So in terms of books about motherhood that we've been discussing, Soldier Sailor is. is wonderful. And another one that I recommend.
Well, I love it. Immediately add to TBR. I'll be putting up links for our listeners and our viewers for sure to all of those books. And of course, to your books, to your platforms, to The Death of Us. Congratulations. When is official publication day? Has it passed? It's this month. I know that.
It's tomorrow, I think.
No, look at
Well,
that.
it's tomorrow in the UK. I'm not actually 100% sure in South Africa, but I imagine it's this week.
We follow
So.
the UK publication date. This episode will come on later, so that's April 10. By the time this gets to you guys, listeners, viewers, it'll be on the bookshelves, and you need to go out and get yourself a copy. Easter's coming up, and we've got some incredible public holidays that lend themselves to reading time in amongst parenting and parenthood and our juggles as mothers. But yeah, if you find yourself in a bookshop, get yourself a copy ASAP, because this is something I need to talk to like all my people about immediately. So people need to kind of get on board. Abigail Dean, it's honestly been such a pleasure chatting with you, and I hope we'll chat again soon. Not too soon. Take your time, enjoy this phase of motherhood, and congratulations on not one but 2 little boys plus 3 novels. So that's 5 babies in like as many years.
Big 5 years.
It's been a crazy 5 years, and that is a significant accomplishment. It's been such a joy to have you on TGE's Current Read.
Thanks, Samantha. Thank you for having me.